I was one of the first people to bring back the Aqidah, Salafiyah, Tawheed to the Americas. I traveled with Tablighi Jamaat. Right? I was one of the serious workers. I met, the Buzuks. I met Hazrat G. And when I was in Medina, I became very close to a Mauritanian who was a very spiritual person. So I had different concepts. And I'm trying to balance these concepts. I'm pushed in this position. How do you deal with this crowd? How do you deal with these different movements, these different schools of thought? And so I literally use this methodology in order to enable the community to overcome the differences.
True revival, it seems what you're saying, means that we have to acknowledge and address all of these different things.
So that's the beauty of that revival that happened on the African continent. And it's really needed today that we revive Islam to overcome some of these doctrinal differences.
No, I'm not worried at all. I rely on God, Allah.
On behalf of the Lifehawk team, thank you for watching this video. And for more clips and beneficial content, please subscribe to the Lifehawk channel, your #1 source for personal Islamic development.
I was pushed into this position as Imam of the Jami Mosque in 1985, which was one of the largest masjids in Canada at the time. And we had 1,000 people for Jummah. And I'm a young person coming out of an Islamic institution. I have an activist background. I'm pushed in this position. How do you deal with this crowd? How do you deal with these different movements, these different schools of thought? My love, my passion for African history took me to Uthman Danfodio. And so I literally saw what he was doing, and I tried it, and it worked. And really, it was a local version of the major revival of Islam that had happened in different parts of the Muslim world over the centuries. And so I literally used this methodology in order to enable the community to overcome the differences, because we were all in the same masjid, all the schools of thought, all the Islamic movements, all the racial groups. How are you going to lead a people like this? How are you going to stop them from, fist fighting each other on Saturday or Sunday after Dawah? Because there's a difference of why the person wiggling his finger, or saying Amin out loud. How are you going to deal with these people? So then this type of revivalist concept was needed, and Muslims have a natural love for the Quran and the Sunnah. So if you bring the Quran and Sunnah in a relevant way, they'll gravitate toward this. If you start talking about my sheikh and my movement and my people, then everybody gets nationalistic. But if you go to the Quran and Sunnah in a relevant way, dealing with an issue that they have themselves, they'll relate to that. And this is what Sheikh Uthman Danfodio was saying. One of the beautiful parts in his revival, and when he was giving advice to the scholars, because again, this is a 20-year-old scholar. 20. What are our 20-year-old people doing now? Playing video games? They're lost in cyberspace? Worshiping the Raptors or LeBron James? Where are their minds at? This is a 20-year-old scholar coming into the field. And then the older scholars are jealous of him. They start to criticize him and attack him. And he responds to them. And one of the points that he made, he said, stop testing and burdening the common Muslims with philosophical arguments about the names and descriptions of Allah. Because the natural Muslim is on the fitrah. Every Muslim's on the natural connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if he doesn't know these philosophical things, teach him that. Instead of testing him and burdening him. And this is what was happening to many of the brothers who were coming out of Medina and and Egypt with the nouveau pseudo Salafi movement, coming out, not understanding the depth of what the Salafi movement's supposed to be. They came out with this fervor, ran back into the communities. This is in the 90s and going into 21st century, and they start testing all the imams, testing the communities, right, and caused a big confusion in a lot of places. Man Denfodio revived Islam, and he cautioned them, do not burden the common people with these questions. Leave these questions to those who have the knowledge and the character to resolve problems.
That's some, I think, very relevant to today's situation. That advice, very relevant.
That's right. It's also his balance. I mean, I was so surprised with his balance because, I was coming out of Medina. I was one of the first people to bring back the Aqidah Salafiyya Tawheed to the Americas. A lot of the ones who claimed to be big Salafi teachers, when they first heard it, it was probably a lecture from some of the early brothers who came out of Medina, right? And then coming into the field. But at the same time, when I first embraced Islam, I traveled with Tablighi Jamaat. Right? I was one of the serious workers. I met, the Buzuks. I met Hazrat G. So I used to travel with the Jamaat. And when I was in Medina, I became very close to a Mauritanian who was a very spiritual person. So I had different concepts. And I'm trying to balance these concepts. Sheikh Uthman balanced the concepts. He balanced it because his basis was fiqh. He had a strong knowledge base, and at the same time, he was highly spiritual. But what he did, he kept his tasawwuf, he kept his spirituality inside of Sharia. So he could be considered a great faqih, and at the same time, in the Qadri tariqah, they were considering him to be what they call qutub. A qutub is one of the aqtab, the poles, the access point of spirituality on earth. He didn't consider himself that, by the way. He refuted and rejected all the claims that people were making about him. And he said the essence of tasawwuf should be for character building. It's ihsan. See, so that's a balanced way of approaching the spirituality, right? And for those who wanted to probe the higher levels of spirituality, you have to first be well-accomplished scholar before you even touch it. Because there's a good possibility you might fall into shirk. So this is his balanced approach to dealing with different movements. He was Maliki in fiqh, but he studied Sha'rani, Abdul Wahab Sha'rani, who was a great comparative fiqh teacher of Egypt. And he was influenced by this. And so he allowed Shafi'i teachings. He studied other schools of thought. That's a balanced way of doing things. So that's the beauty of that revival that happened on the African continent. And it's really needed today that we revive Islam to overcome some of these doctrinal differences.
What I'm hearing from you, Sheikh, is that true revival means you cannot be extreme in just one thing. That's I think an important thing to note, because when we have maybe youth or people in general coming back to the deen, oftentimes they just might go head over heels in just one narrow aspect of the deen, whether it's the Jamaat Tabligh, whether it's tasawwuf, whether it's street dawah, any of these things. But true revival, it seems what you're saying, means that we have to acknowledge and address all of these different things.
Exactly. And that's why Allah tells us, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. And thus we have made you into a middle, balanced nation. So Ummatan Wasata is a balanced nation. It's not extremes, right? And that's the wisdom of applying. I was in the 90s, I was giving lectures in the summer with the Forum for Social Studies. And I traveled with Dr. Jamal Bedoui and Imam Siraj Wahaj and people like this. And we traveled around, England, UK, and, Scotland, whatever. And we used to end up in the Regent's Park Mosque in London.
Mm.
And London, of course, is a controversial place. All the schools of thought and the madhabs, they seem to have their leaders, are living somewhere in the UK. So people are really intense with each other. We're generally not that intense here in Canada. You got places like New York City where people tend to be kind of intense as well. But London is an extreme. And they used to ask me questions, not to get the answer, but to find out how I was going to answer it.
Mm.
So they could label me as one of the groups.
Yeah, the gotcha questions, right?
Right. So
Yeah.
I stood up one day in front of them, and I said to them, all of your movements, take your Salafi, Sufi, Tablighi, Ikhwani, Hizb Tahriri, and throw it out the window.
Mm.
If it is dividing you from your brothers and sisters, if it takes you from Quran and Sunnah. And the people looked at me and they said, Abdullah Hakim has lost his mind.
Mm.
But then when they thought about it, they couldn't refute what I was saying.
Mm.
Because when you study the Salafi movement, when you study Tasawwuf, when you study Tabligh, you see that these movements are developed because of issues happening amongst people.
Mm.
In some places like the Tabligh movement, the people had the masjids and the graves and the madrasas, but they lost the spirit of Islam.
Mm.
So Sheikh Muhammad Ilyas, when they first formed the movement, it was to bring back the love of the masjid and the love of the sunnah.
Mm.
Now, it may be argued that it morphed into something else later. But what I understand, that was the basis in the beginning. So if you understand the movements, all of them, they were not made to divide Muslims up.
Mm.
And if it is dividing us up, then what is the purpose of it? Is the angels, a Munkar and Nakir, going to ask you in the grave, were you a Salafi? What tariqah were you?
Mm.
They're not going to ask you those questions.
Mm.
You see, so somehow, and this is with respects to the movements, by the way, because you have to respect the issues. But can't we take the best out of all the movements?
Mm.
Can't we take the best out of the Salafiyah?
Mm.
The best out of Tasawwuf? The best out of Tabligh, Khuruj, go out in the path,
Mm.
right? Can we take the best out, out of the Ikhwan, community organizing, Tarbiyah, education, right? Looking at Islam as a whole way of life. Can't we take the best out of all these movements and then revive Islam in a 21st century fashion?
I think it's because maybe those people who are within those movements lose sight of the purpose of the movement itself. Like, what is the essence of that movement? Just like, when people get so sectarian in the school of fiqh, what is the purpose of that, of that madhab, for example? It's to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's to get your family closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the people closer, saving you and your, family from Jahannam. So if that's precluding you from doing that, like if it becomes so restrictive, maybe you've lost sight of the essence, the purpose of what that movement was created for.
Exactly. And when you go back and look at the great scholars, and I remember dealing with this because the whole issue of Ramadan, right? And then, the Hilal, this is where you see divisions come up. But when you go back to the actual school of thought, you'll find that in many cases, the fatwa that modern day people are following was not made by Abu Hanifa or Shafi'i. It was made by somebody else in the 20th century. But he was a Hanafi or he was a Shafi'i. So they say, this is the Hanafi school.
Mm.
It's not Abu Hanifa.
Yeah.
It's somebody who lived 50 years ago somewhere else. So the perspective, again, is important, and being humble with each other, right? Being open-minded. That really is, the essence of the Dawah person and the reviver, and it's really needed for the younger generation today.
In that same vein, to bring this type of consolidation, or at least have that unity upon understanding what is the underlying main purpose of everything, should we also, when we look at history and historical figures, should we like more embrace the term, hey, this is Islamic history, not just, hey, this is Indo-Pak history, this is African history, this is like, Roman or like Muslims living in, the Western lands history. Like, should we start like now when we revive this, like we all claim it, hey, this is from us and we are from them, type of thing.
True. Because that's what it's supposed to do. Islam breaks down the tribalism and the nationalism. We have an identity. Yes, we're supposed to have an identity. We're supposed to know our lineage, but that is not supposed to divide us from other Muslims. And so, what's happening now because of white supremacy and because of tribalism amongst ourselves, we have to a certain extent, work backwards. We have to establish the importance of all of the different people of Islam, all of the different ethnic groups within Islam, and then work back up towards that, that unity of the Jama'ah, which is sometimes a slippery slope. You have to watch out, because if you go too much into your own movement, then you get ultra nationalistic, like in the case of the Nation of Islam, where everything became, just based upon black people, and it got extreme, and then, went outside of Islam in terms of Aqidah. So this is important, to keep that balance, and to keep that perspective and keep our eyes on the prize, which is unity, which is the Ummah consciousness. That's the blessing, and the Ummah connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what we're all supposed to be working towards. But if somebody is sick, if somebody's struggling, then all of us are struggling. Right? It's like the famous hadith that if there's a part of the body which is, sick, then the whole body responds, with fever and, with sickness. So that's the reality. If, somebody is hurting in our nation, we're all supposed to be hurting. And this had been brought to the surface. It was already there, but it was brought to the surface a year ago with the killing of George Floyd, and the Black Lives Movement, and all these different things that are going up now, this new wave amongst the younger generation. It sort of reminded people again of this issue. And for some people, it opened their eyes to the issue, which was good. But now your eyes are open, you have to continue to go on. Because as I say, the truth could be hidden in plain sight. It could have been with you all along, but you didn't deal with it. I was talking to a brother, a friend of mine. He's of Pakistani Canadian origin, close friend and colleague of mine. I'm not going to say his name. And, he said that he was shocked when he was reading that Salim, Mawla Abi Hudayfa, radiallahu anh, the great companion, who was one of the 4 top Quran readers in the time of the Prophet, that he was black. He was shocked. Because he had seen the name before, but it just didn't. Just to come to grips with that. It is something that, that he was just never taught that, because we're insulated in our tribes, right? We're insulated in our ethnic groups. And unfortunately, many of the masjids that develop in urban areas are based on ethnic groups. When we had the Jami Mosque in Toronto, that some people call the golden years, between 1985 and 1989, we had all the communities together. But then the Toronto spread out to what they call the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. And now places like Mississauga and Scarborough, they start to develop. So Muslims go out there and they open up warehouses They rent these places, and suddenly you go to one masjid, and it's like Mogadishu, Somalia.
Mm.
You go to another one, it's like you're in Kabul, Afghanistan. You go to another one, it's like Istanbul, Turkey.
Mm.
There's a different flavor to all the different masjids. And the extreme in that I found, one day I was called to a masjid. I don't want to say the groups, but I was called to one masjid of one group, a warehouse, and there was another one about 3 or 4 warehouses down, which was another group. So I was called to Jum'ah in a typical Muslim fashion, Muslim standard time. We were late, so last minute they're rushing me inside the masjid. Yalla, go inside, Abdullah, go inside. There's only 5 minutes before the khutbah. People are sitting there. As we're going in, the fire trucks are sitting in front of the other masjid. And so I stopped the brothers and I said, what is going on? Isn't that a masjid? Like, shouldn't we check it? And they said, no, don't worry, brother, don't worry. And so we went inside, I made the khutbah, and I came out. The fire engines were gone. And I said to some of the brothers, what happened? And they said, we don't know. That's their brothers and sisters in that building, right? That's an extreme.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Sunni Shia either. They were all Sunnis.
Yeah.
That's straight up nationalism.
Do you think that's like a byproduct of like weak iman, or like just not understanding the fundamentals of your deen? Like it just seems that like if you believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, that automatically links you, to another Muslim in a very deep way, like more than blood. So do you think that's like a fundamental defect or some type of weakness in iman?
I mean, part of it is weakness in iman, but a lot of it is that Muslims do not take their religion from the usul. They don't take it from the basis of the Quran and the Sunnah. They take their religion from their culture. And when you take your religion from your culture, then your value judgments within the religion is shaped on your culture. So you will value certain people in a certain way. You value certain languages in a certain way. And you don't value the essence of the person, which is their faith. So in many cases, the person may have a good heart, but they're ignorant. And the training that they've gotten has actually made them more of a cultural Muslim than an actual authentic Muslim, who does not look at color and does not look at ethnicity or language as something that divides them up. It only describes the person, but it doesn't give value to that person. The value is the taqwa, the consciousness of Allah. It's the knowledge. It's the practice. It's not how they look. But culture is different, because cultures develop where one group moves into an area and they're defending their tribe and they have to fight another tribe. So sort of like this culture develops based on their struggle with the other tribe. And you'll see cultures around the world develop around these issues.
Yes.
And that Islam came to break that down. But it's a weakness in people, and it's a weakness in many of the so-called scholars who didn't teach honestly when they were teaching Islam.
Sheikh, I want to ask you 2 things. We don't have too much time, but I'm very selfish, and I wanted to get your insight on like 2 questions here, and if you can try to be succinct, because I actually want to get your response for both of them. And this first question that I wanted to ask you is based on the fact that you are one of the few people who has witnessed decades, and also, you've been in so many different lands. Do you feel the boldness of our resistance, like of resisting, say, injustice, has diminished in recent times? Like, albeit, like, there is a lot, like, you could say in mass media, whether it's, the Black Lives Movement and things like that. But when I look at things as a whole, even my own brief history of like being in tune with, resisting, you could say, injustice generally, you look at, say the area of the 70s, you can even see it in the culture, the 70s and 80s, even when you look at, some of the movies that people were willing to make, anti-war movies, for example, you don't see that today. You see people just mostly towing the line of the dominant hegemonical power. You know what I mean? Like, it's a badge of honor. Like, people come back now. Like, if you see just in media or movies, people come back, oh, look, he had so many tours in Iraq, a war that was based on a lie. Whereas, like, if you look at, post-Vietnam War, you saw it's almost like a shame. Oh, we fought for nothing. It was injustice. Why were we there? And you had figures like Muhammad Ali standing up and speaking out against it. Fast forward now, we'll talk about, because I think there's a level of corporatization with like a lot of these identity politics. You'll have LeBron saying, hey, like, Black Lives Matter. What about China? Oh, we can't speak about that at all, about the issues there. So do you feel that the boldness or like the courage that was involved in the resistance of injustice 70s and 80s, do you see that still today? Or do you think that, the institutional powers have become kind of hip to how to control the masses a little bit better? So sometimes we feel like we're doing things, but we've actually become more and more pacified. What are your thoughts on that? I like to really hear what you have to say on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a deep question, and really,
yeah, I know.
You've got to look at history, and you've got to look at the cycle of things. Ibn Khaldun, talked about, that there's a point where societies are very high up and strong, and then they get weaker. If they don't do revival, they can actually go right down to the bottom. And so we have suffered a series of traumas, major traumas in the Muslim world. I mean, go back to, Palestine is continuous, and then, the different political issues, and, and then the weather issues, the droughts, the famines. We've suffered major traumas, and then the September 11th, propaganda that demonized Muslims based upon the so-called September 11th, issue. It demonized Muslims, and we were traumatized. And then now with the rise of digital technology, and people depending so much upon their cell phones, and their internet, that the cancel culture, the ability to attack somebody and cancel them, electronically in cyberspace, it didn't happen like that before. If you were back in the 60s and you made something, you said something, like, you could go underground, right? You could go somewhere else. If you were crossing the border, for instance, going to, like, I'm talking about Canada and the United States. If a person had a problem, in one of the border crossings in Buffalo, and then they didn't let them in for some reason, they could drive 20 miles and go across another border. Because the two posts were not connected together. That wouldn't happen now, right? Because everything is online.
Yeah.
So the cancel culture now has put us in a trauma, and it's going to take a new type of creativity. Everything starts coming back around. Nothing is static. And the great powers are now falling down. You see what's happening in America now. It's a dysfunctional family, right? Europe did dysfunctional societies. So things are falling down, and other things are starting to grow back up. And that is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the ultimate giver and taker of all things. And as the Arabs would say, Yawmun laka wa yawmun alayk. There's one day which is for you and another day against you. But it all continues in a cycle.
JazakumAllahu Khairan, Sheikh. And the somewhat related question, but when we're talking about white supremacy, do you see white supremacy, like the mechanisms of white supremacy being intact, but maybe instead of white supremacy, it's being replaced by an ideological supremacy? Because, for example, now you'll say, hey, the president is half black, the vice president now is black, or you know what I mean? And so you could maybe have the mechanisms of white supremacy in place of like, being able to control, oppress people and try to like have people adopt, a dominant culture. But like, the kind of the people at the top, the elitists who are controlling that, the puppet masters, it's become maybe at least on an identity level a little bit more diverse. So do you see that happening? Like, so then maybe we have to update that term white supremacy to just, supremacy, What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the concept of supremacy has been from the beginning of time with Shaitan, as you know, the first racist. So, but white supremacy, again, you have to look at racism in three parts. There's the ideology, there are racist expressions, and then there's institutionalized racism. There are three parts of white supremacy. Number one is the ideology. The ideology is being broken down now. And you see people even knocking down statues, and they're dealing with history. One of the good things about the internet is people are sharing information, like crazy all over the place. So a lot of people are woke now. They're awake. They're not sleeping anymore, but they're confused as to what to do. So really, it's a matter of that cycle continuing, and institutionalized racism will take time. That is not going to fall down overnight, because it's institutions that have been built up for years. And in many cases, there's a military and a police that's in back of it. So it's not going to fall. But there was a point in time when the Mongol nation, and I know that you've done some studies in the Ottomans as well. I'm immersed in, Ottoman culture. And there's a point where the Mongols, if you look at their spread out of Asia, they were invincible. There was nobody on the ground who could defeat the Mongols, because they could fight in the winter, in the summer, in the desert, in the jungle, and they continued to go, and they assimilate cultures. But eventually, it was because Berke Khan, the Golden Hordes, it was internal. It was internally they started fighting each other, because there was no power on earth that could actually stop them at that time. But internally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifested that some of them embraced Islam, and then their corruption and then death of their leaders. And so they internally fell apart. So even though the Western powers appear invincible, they're not invincible, and we're seeing them falling apart. You see the madness that happened with Donald Trump and the storming of Washington, D.C. And this is a dysfunctional family. Nobody's going to defeat them from the outside. But it is the deterioration of the society itself, and the expose, of the wrongs that have been done, which eventually brings down great society, so-called great, like the Roman Empire. It eventually falls.
I think that gives people a good hope to move from, because oftentimes when you see some of the injustices these great powers enact, I think gives them hope to see that, hey, listen, they may be trying to do some type of supremacy, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the supreme. And, and he gives, power to whom he wills, and it can change, and we should remain steadfast in our hope in Allah.
That's right. And one of the, beauties of Islam is that the Prophet ﷺ said, at the head of every 100 years or generation, there would be mujaddid, there would be revivers of the faith would come, put life back into the faith. And so this is, we've seen it historically. Waves have come against us, and the Quran and the Sunnah is still there. Islam is still there. And so these waves are hitting us in an really dangerous way, but Allah is the greatest. And we hold on to that and believe ultimately that change will come.
Inshallah.
JazakumAllahu Khairan, Sheikh. I really enjoyed our conversation, and it went by very quickly. And inshallah, we have to do this again, because this topic of Tajdeed and Islah and revivers, like this gives us hope. to know that, when people, this is a hadith of hope. This is a hadith of direction. No matter where we find ourselves, no matter how downtrodden we are, there's a direction for us to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and uplift ourselves at the same time. So, Jazakumullahu Khair for your time and your contribution. And I look forward actually to doing this with you again very soon.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakumullahu khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
All right, dear brothers and sisters, the action does not stop here.
Do I feel that the New York police are providing enough protection, or do I have to have protection of my own? I look for protection from Allah.